Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest chapter of Ars Magica, taken from the subreddit HFY. All the relevant links are down below, and please like, comment, and subscribe like any good minion of the algorithm would do. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 81. It had been a while since she had seen anybody around. It had been quite long enough for her to have found his identity, as had been apparent by her physiological changes since. For a couple of hours, he had debated upon whether or not to be classified as a he. The idea had some amount of merit towards him, but they figured that if he ever found issues with what they thought themselves to be, he could always just change it. Such was his nature. And indeed, once he could sense changes within his surroundings, his mentality shifted once again, and her features stood out once more. She had simply thought it was because some warmer currents had found their way into her home, but that wasn't the case. So it came as a bit of a surprise to her to find those wayward challengers rounding upon her position shortly. Of course, she wasn't quite as concerned as before about her area. She managed to corral the void through her efforts. Most, if not all of it, was quite inaccessible towards anyone, unless they had a teleportation artifact that she had yet to find or sense. There were skills and magic that could perform the same effect, but she was sure that the dungeon could put a hamper upon them, as it could inherently feel those energies better than she could. However, the main reason her eyes felt like they were deceiving her was the manner upon which all 5 of the challengers had appeared within her coral kingdom, where before they had seemingly managed to hold themselves together under the pressure of the ocean, willing their breath to last as long as it did. Something had managed to change in between when she had last seen them in her depths. Now, for all except one, which seemed to be the most like her, given its somewhat differing fluidic nature, had a bubble of air surrounding their heads. She stared for only about a moment before a chuckle rippled through her. It wasn't for long, though, as she realized the exact nature of the bubble itself. The water that bordered the sphere hadn't simply displaced, but transformed into the air which form-fitted around them. She could have called it quite a ridiculous sight. Now, she just called it an annoyance bordering upon an insult. She kept an eye upon them as they came into her inner abode, and beheld her in all her glory. Of course, those with eyes not accustomed to the darkness like hers would only be able to see that her natural glowing corals allowed them to see, which would be the vague outlines of her throne upon the floor. As they crept closer, she waited, for patience was something that she could exercise when she needed to. It was definitely something that she could normally deal with fine, but anticipation was a much grander thing beyond conveyed to her than she'd like to be at that moment in time. She eyes the final foot crossing the ring of shells, and as her form began to gear up in preparation, she was stopped. The conundrum had presented itself towards her. She both had to deal with the challengers that were here, but now she had to deal with a new one as well. It was strange, considering nothing that was given to her let her know why this was a possibility. In fact, nothing she was given gave her anything to deal with the current situation at hand, which positively stumped her. The only thing which she thought she could do, given what she already knew, was splitting herself. However, therein lay the main issue. If she split herself, she couldn't give the challengers a proper challenge if they had gotten the phrase wrong. It took her all 5 seconds to decide upon which she should do, rather than on what she had wanted to do. So she split herself to actually check upon the new challenger and provide him with much the same clue as the others had before her. With a split attention, she had a bit of trouble actually understanding what was going on in both her coral cavern as well as the currents herself were riding upon. She could still sense the group were 5 within her domain, but their vibrations did not feel like outright hostility that she had come to expect. Her form began to smile as she laid back upon her throne. None of them had yet to say any of the phrases to begin answering the puzzle. From what she could tell, they were either still trying to talk to her, or they were just talking amongst each other, readying themselves for the answer. While that was happening, her attention moved towards the other form, as it was finally rising above the surface, bearing witness towards the newly arrived challenger. She couldn't quite tell what exactly it was, given the amount of clothes upon its body and the fact that it blended into its surroundings almost as well as an actual chameleon, were it not for all the clothes upon it. At first, she didn't exactly know whether or not she would be able to garner its attention, given that it wasn't reacting whatsoever towards her presence. She opted to do the things she had done before to calm the other challengers. She began to sing. Her vibrato didn't act quite as immediately as it had at first done. Although she didn't have to wait long, she was still waiting for a bit before the challenger managed to sit bolt upright upon the beach at her song's crescendo. Her senses gave a pause, though, as the thing quickly and rather abruptly had managed to start attacking her. Of course, the fact that the challenger attacking her wasn't something that she was surprised about all too much. The other challengers were much in the same way until she had proven that she wasn't set out to kill them. The only question here was how would she prove herself with no others around. She thought back to the first time this happened and realized that perhaps she could repeat the circumstances. Surely, if the challenger was injured and healed by her, they would begin to trust her. She saw nothing inherently wrong with the plan, until her water jets, with her ejected from her body, failed to injure the challenger whatsoever. Whenever they were ejected with velocity, any injury that was upon their person, whether it was a scratch, scrape, broken bone, or hole piercing through them, the injury almost closed as fast as it had formed. It wasn't necessarily a problem, given that no permanent harm was being done to the challenger, but it did mean that she couldn't get herself to heal them before they could heal themselves. She briefly thought about utilizing poison, but she figured that if it was a party's healer, whether they were a cleric or shaman or just a regular medic, they would have more ways to heal themselves than she could possibly have, injuring them. So utterly stuck, she went to the same motions, hoping that whatever energy they were expending to heal themselves wasn't necessarily as large as the source of her own. While that all happened, she of course made sure to rearrange her front towards the message she was supposed to give out. As long as the challenger saw it, she could very well say that she had done her job and focus back on her lair, which she could feel was ready for a possible answer from the others within. In that brief second of inattention, though, was the biggest mistake that she could make within that scuffle upon the beach. For a while her attention was elsewhere. The power of decay crept upon her and through her. As her senses picked up the phrase to begin registering the challenger's words, so too did they feel the decay creep through her connection, concocting and degrading the ocean in a steam towards her cavern. Fearfully, she cut the connection, splitting her attention in twain in a more permanent sense than what she was used to. Now, the only way to connect back towards the main point of control would be a more physical meeting than a magical means she had been accomplishing it by so far. That, though, was not going to happen, for the challenger had managed to completely encapsulate and destroy the instance that had been put in place in front of them. But at once she realized she could no longer feel herself split over the distance. Any instances and knowledge stored there was simply put, gone without a trace. A hint of sadness was passed through her, as well as a hint of panic towards any knowledge that had been lost within that moment. She realized that she did not know any more how to welcome new challenges, and while that was an important piece of information for the future, the immediate present still had applicable information. She could still get these challenges out of her floor well enough. However, now that the knowledge itself was gone, she realized that there was nothing stopping her from putting her forefront of her effort towards punishment. After all, a golem will only know what's been given to it, nothing more. If it's taken away, it's much like a memory itself was erased from existence. Unless the dungeon were to hand over knowledge yet again, she could act with as much impunity as she could in whatever manner she deemed suitable. So with a gleeful smile, as the wrong vibrations passed her from the challengers within her newfound lair, the boss fight could finally begin. End of chapter
I would quickly like to thank the Tier 5 members, Marky, Cam Maxwell, Caspar Arnolds, Oakfield, Lord Azrakul, and it's difficult to pronounce. Thank you very much.